Okay, let's be honest. When I say the word Jurassic, what's the first image that pops into your head? For most of us, it's a giant, thundering T-Rex, right? But what if I told you that the most famous dinosaur in the world didn't even live during the Jurassic period? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain, separate the movie magic from the mind-blowing reality, and explore a world that is so much stranger and way more important than Hollywood ever let on.
Yeah, we've all got this picture just seared into our brains, and we can thank one of the biggest movies of all time for that. It gave us this unforgettable, awe-inspiring vision of the dinosaur age. But it also got one really big thing wrong.
And this one little question? It changes everything. It turns what we thought we knew on its head and reveals how the movie's biggest, most terrifying stars are basically imposters in their own story. So, let's dive right into it. We're going to unpack what I'm calling the Jurassic Park problem. By peeling back all that Hollywood gloss, we can finally meet the real Jurassic.
So, to really get this, we've got to zoom out a little. The age of dinosaurs is officially called the Mesozoic era, and you can think of it like a big three-act play. The Triassic period was Act 1, the dawn of the dinosaurs. The Cretaceous was Act 3, the dramatic, explosive finale. And the Jurassic, that's our focus. It was the magnificent golden age right in the middle.
And here it is, the core of the problem. The movie's biggest headliners, T-Rex, Velociraptor, Triceratops, are all from the Cretaceous period. And get this, the time gap is staggering. Tyrannosaurus rex lived closer in time to us than it did to the Stegosaurus from the late Jurassic. That's just mind-blowing, right? So you have to ask, why is it called Jurassic Park then? Well, funny enough, the name has absolutely nothing to do with dinosaurs. It actually comes from the Jura Mountains in Europe, where the limestone from this period was first studied. And the name Jura itself probably means forest, which is actually a pretty perfect preview of the world we're about to step into. Okay, now that we've set the record straight, let's take a trip back to the world of the real Jurassic. And I'm telling you, you've got to forget what you've seen in the movies. This was basically an alien planet, a greenhouse world operating under a completely different set of rules.
First off, try to picture a world so consistently warm that there was no ice at the poles, not a single glacier, no ice sheets at all. This created a global, humid greenhouse with much weaker climate zones than we have today. It was just this planet of endless, balmy warmth.
So, with no ice caps, where did all that water go? Into the oceans. Sea levels swelled by more than 140 meters. That's 460 feet, flooding the continents and creating these huge, shallow seas, like the Sundance Sea that once covered a huge chunk of the American West.
But the air was the real shocker, and for us, it would have been totally toxic. Carbon dioxide levels were at least 4 times what they are today. But the oxygen is what's really surprising. It was dangerously low, somewhere between 10 and 15%, compared to our 21%. Trying to breathe that air would be like standing on top of a super high mountain without an oxygen mask. You just couldn't survive.
So how in the world did these giant active animals thrive on so little oxygen? Well, they had a biological superpower, a ridiculously efficient bird-like respiratory system. They had these air sacs that allowed them to pull way more oxygen out of every single breath. This wasn't something that evolved for flight. It was a pure survival adaptation.
Okay, so we've set the stage. A hot, humid, low-oxygen world. Now, let's meet the actual titans of the Jurassic. Forget the movie cast. These are the animals that truly defined this alien landscape.
You know, with the giant sauropods, right? The largest land animals of all time? They didn't just decide to get big. Their insane size was the result of a domino effect, an evolutionary cascade. It all started with the food, tough, fibrous plants that weren't very nutritious. To get enough energy, they had to evolve these super long necks to just constantly eat without moving their huge bodies. To support those necks, their heads had to get incredibly light, which meant losing heavy teeth and chewing muscles. And if you can't chew your food, well, your body has to become a massive, walking fermentation tank to digest it all. So how did all these different giants coexist in the same forest without starving each other out? They basically divided up the menu. It's called niche partitioning. You had Brachiosaurus with its giraffe-like posture acting as the high browser, eating from the treetops. And then you had the long, horizontal Diplodocus as the low browser, sweeping the forest floor for ferns. Everyone stayed in their own lane. And the true king? The apex predator? Forget T-Rex. If you were in the late Jurassic, the lion of the Jurassic was Allosaurus. This was the most common large predator of its time, a seriously formidable hunter.
We often find its fossils with battle scars, like puncture wounds that perfectly match the tail spikes of its favorite prey, the Stegosaurus.
But all the action wasn't just on land. The Jurassic saw these incredible revolutions happening across the entire planet. So now let's look to the skies and dive into the seas for some truly amazing stories.
So up in the skies, one of the most important events in the history of life was unfolding: the birth of birds. For more than 150 years, our whole picture of this moment came from one fossil, Archaeopteryx. It was seen as the perfect missing link. It had bird-like feathers, but also a long, bony, dinosaur-like tail. But then, just recently in 2024, a discovery from China completely rewrote the story. Say hello to Bamionornis. It lived at the same time as Archaeopteryx, but its tail was totally different. It had a short, fused bone at the end called a pygostyle, just like modern birds have. This tells us that bird evolution wasn't a simple, straight line. There were at least two different models of bird coexisting in the Jurassic skies.
Okay, now let's dive into the seas and talk about a legend made famous by a BBC documentary, the Liopleurodon. The show portrayed it as this colossal, 25-meter, bus-sized monster. It was terrifying. But was it really that big?
Well, the scientific reality is a little more modest. Based on the fossils we have now, we estimate an adult Liopleurodon was between 5 and 7.5 meters long. I mean, that's still larger than a great white shark and an absolute apex predator for sure, but not quite a leviathan. It's a perfect example of how science is a process, always revising and refining what we know as new evidence comes in.
And you know, it's not just about the giants. In the Jurassic Ocean, some of the most important fossils were these small, shelled creatures called ammonites. Geologists call them guide fossils. Why? Because they evolved so rapidly and were spread all over the globe, so finding a specific type of ammonite lets geologists date that rock layer with incredible precision. They're basically the Jurassic's living clocks.
But you know, maybe the most important story of the Jurassic has nothing to do with the giants. It's about a quiet revolution that was happening in their shadows, one that would eventually give rise to our modern world.
While the dinosaurs were ruling the day, the blueprints for our world were being drawn in the shadows. This was the quiet revolution. Tiny mammals weren't just hiding, they were specializing into creatures like the termite-eating Fruitophosaur. The first true frogs appeared. The ancestors of modern sharks patrolled the seas. Birds took to the skies, and deep in the forests, it's possible the very first flowering plants began to bloom. In so many ways, our world was truly born in the Jurassic.
So the Jurassic wasn't just an age of titans. It was an age of origins. It reminds us that even when one form of life seems to completely dominate the planet, the seeds of the next age are always being quietly planted, just waiting for their moment in the sun. And it leaves us with a fascinating thought. What quiet revolutions might be happening in the shadows of our own time, waiting to define the future?
Welcome, everyone. It is time to put your knowledge to the ultimate test. We're not just talking about the dinosaurs you see in the movies. We're talking about the real deal. So get ready for the official Jurassic Masters certification quiz. So here's the goal, a perfect 10 out of 10. We're about to dive deep into the real science behind this incredible time period, separating the Hollywood fiction from cold, hard paleontological fact. Think you've got what it takes? Well, let's find out.
All right, let's kick things off with question number 1. We'll start with the basics. That name, Jurassic, is absolutely iconic, but where does it actually come from? Take a second. Are we talking about a dinosaur, a person, or maybe a place? And the answer is, it's a mountain range. The name comes from the Jura Mountains, right on the border between France and Switzerland. But here's the really cool part. The period was named way back in 1829. That's more than a decade before the word dinosaur was even invented. So the Jurassic period was originally all about rocks, not giant reptiles.
Okay, let's keep the momentum going. Question 2 is all about the timeline. We all know the Mesozoic era as the Great Age of Dinosaurs, but it's actually split into 3 distinct parts. Can you put them in the correct order from oldest to newest?
The correct order is Triassic, Jurassic, and then Cretaceous. This timeline really tells the complete story of the dinosaurs. They first show up in the Triassic, they hit their golden age, we're talking peak giants in the Jurassic, and then they reach this incredible climax of diversity right before the end in the Cretaceous. The Jurassic is smack dab in the middle. It's the heart of the dinosaur dynasty.
All right, question 3. Let's travel back in time to the Jurassic world itself. What was the one massive, planet-defining difference in the climate back then compared to the world we live in right now?
The answer is there was no ice at the poles. I mean, none. At all. And that is a total game changer. Without any polar ice caps, sea levels were astronomically high, maybe over 140 meters higher than they are today. The entire planet was essentially a warm, humid greenhouse state, which created this incredibly lush green world, just perfect for giant plant eaters to thrive.
Okay, time for a tricky one, and this one often surprises people. Question 4 is about the very air the dinosaurs were breathing. Now, for them to get so ridiculously huge, you'd think they had more oxygen than we do today. But did they? Or was it less?
And the answer, believe it or not, is much lower. Just look at this chart. Jurassic oxygen levels hovered around 12 to 15% compared to our comfortable 21%. To put that in perspective, that's like living at an altitude of over 4,000 meters. For us, that'd be lethal. So how on earth did they thrive? Well, they had a secret weapon, a hyper-efficient bird-like respiratory system with air sacs that let them pull way more oxygen from every single breath.
Okay, let's talk about the giants themselves. For question 5, we want to know the secret to their incredible size. What was that one trigger, the very first domino to fall, that started the journey for these long-necked titans to become the biggest land animals of all time?
It all started with their food. See, the plants back in the Jurassic were tough and not very nutritious. This kicked off what we call an evolutionary cascade. To get enough energy, they had to eat massive quantities of these plants, so they grew long necks to basically graze a huge area without having to move their bodies. But to support a neck that long, their heads had to be light, so they lost the ability to chew. And since they were swallowing everything whole, their bodies had to become giant fermentation vats just to digest it all. It was a brilliant chain reaction where one thing led directly to the next. So picture this. You have multiple species of absolute giants living together in the same forest. How does that even work? Question 6 asks how massive herbivores like Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus managed to share the same habitat without basically starving each other out of existence.
They did it with a really elegant solution called niche partitioning. It's actually pretty simple. Brachiosaurus, with its super long front legs and giraffe-like posture, was a high browser, eating leaves from the tops of the trees. Meanwhile, Diplodocus, with its long horizontal body, was a low browser, eating ferns and other low-lying vegetation. Essentially, they were shopping on different shelves in nature's grocery store.
All right, let's dive into the Jurassic Seas for question 7. Pop culture, and especially that famous documentary Walking with Dinosaurs, painted the marine reptile Liopleurodon as this terrifying 25-meter-long monster. But what does the actual fossil evidence say?
The real answer is a more modest, but let's be honest, still terrifying, 5 to 7 meters long. I mean, that's still bigger than a great white shark, but it's nowhere near the 25-meter Leviathan from TV. This is a perfect example of how science is always a work in progress. As we find more complete fossils, our understanding gets sharper, and some of those old myths get corrected. Now for a question that comes straight from the cutting edge of science. In 2024, a brand new fossil bird called Phanerozoic was announced. So why was this tiny fossil such a huge deal for paleontologists?
Well, Phanerozoic basically rewrote the story of early bird evolution. The famous first bird, Archaeopteryx, had a long, clunky, dinosaur-like tail. But Phanerozoic, which lived at the exact same time, had a short, fused tailbone, just like modern birds, which is a critical feature for steering in the air. The big takeaway here is that bird evolution wasn't this single straight line from A to B. It was a complex branching tree, with primitive and more advanced birds already coexisting way back in the Jurassic.
Okay, let's tackle the big one. Question 9 is the ultimate piece of pop culture trivia. The movie is called Jurassic Park, but its biggest, most famous star is an imposter. Which legendary dinosaur in that film actually lived millions and millions of years later in the Cretaceous period?
Of course, it's the Tyrannosaurus rex. And actually, it's not just T-Rex. Velociraptor and Triceratops were all from the Cretaceous period. Get this, T-Rex lived closer in time to us than it did to Stegosaurus. So why call it Jurassic Park? Well, let's face it, Jurassic just sounds way more powerful and iconic than Cretaceous, right?
And here we are, our final question. Ammonites were absolutely everywhere in the Jurassic oceans, and they were definitely on the menu for marine reptiles. But beyond being a tasty snack, why are these spiral-shelled fossils one of the most important tools a geologist can possibly have?
The answer is they are what we call index fossils. You can think of them like a geological clock. See, ammonites evolved incredibly fast, with different species only existing for very short windows of time. So, if a geologist finds a specific type of ammonite fossil in a rock layer in England, and another scientist finds the exact same type in Japan, they know, instantly, that those two rock layers are the exact same age. They let us sync up Earth's history across the entire globe. It's amazing.
And that's a wrap. All 10 questions are done. Go ahead and take a moment, count up how many you got right, and let's find out what your official Jurassic rank is.
Okay, here are the official titles. If you got a perfect 10, congratulations, you are a certified Jurassic master. If you got 8 or 9, you are a wise Archaeopteryx, seeing the big picture. 4 to 7 correct makes you a young Allosaurus, a powerful contender with a lot of bite. And if you got 0 to 3, you are a Jurassic egg, full of potential and ready to learn even more.
So no matter what your score was, what's the big takeaway from all this? It's that the Jurassic was so much more than just an age of giants. It was this incredible time of change. Continents were breaking apart. The climate was totally alien. The very air was different. And in the shadows of those giants, the ancestors of everything we know today, birds, mammals, even flowering plants, were just getting their start. The Jurassic wasn't just the past. In a lot of ways, it was the dawn of our own world.